Oh, we're live? All right. I need my producer to tell me that I'm live. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Investment Committee. Today, we're going to be talking about the markets and where we are from month to month. So last week, or rather last month, we went over a little bit of a synopsis on where we were with the market, some of the things that are happening in the news that might be relevant to you as investors, as you think about navigating through these choppy waters and the environments that we see. And then we have a phenomenal guest, Michael Tozzoli, to help talk about some of the, I would say, the emotional and psychological components of money. And we're going to get into what that means and how that impacts you and your viewpoints around money, the relationship of money and family, and I think we have a really good conversation etched out for you today. So I've got Michael is on here. Obviously, my partner Jordan is here to bring some flavor and some color to the conversation as our CIO. And then we have our two analysts and advisors, Sean Cole and Brandon Sisk, to help support some of the conversation that we have here. So welcome, guys, and we appreciate your time. We're going to cut this to about 45 minutes. The goal is not to spend the entirety of the day or afternoon. It's about, that's amazing. It's about, I have no idea how that happened.
How did that happen? Why did it happen? And why isn't it happening more?
I don't know, but
That was awesome.
it's about hitting the 45-minute mark and making sure that we're we're at least opening the floor up for questions. So Sean is running the show here, so if you can throw up the screen to show our PowerPoint slide, that would be great. And I'll let you guys kind of take it from here.
Yeah, you guys can see my screen all right? Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfectly.
All right, so here's a little bit of the agenda that we're going to be covering today. We're going to give you guys a little bit of a March market update, what's changed since the last time we spoke to you guys on February 22nd. We're going to have a conversation with Michael about psychology and money. And then, like Bobby said, open it to some question and answer at the end. So first thing we want to cover is just a review of the market vitals so far in 2024. S&P still very strong so far this year, up 7.6%. As of our last webinar, it was up 6.2%. So it's continued its strength, up another 1.4 over the last month. And to the right, you can see some of the major indices, how they performed so far this year. One thing that we really like to stress is not all equities are created equal. Something that Bobby always says, diversification for the sake of just diversification is lazy asset management. So you can see how some of these different indices have performed. S&P up 7.6. You compare that to something like the Vanguard Total International, which is only up 3%. It hasn't done as well. One thing that we talked about last time also, the Russell 2000, which really focuses on small cap companies, is only up 1% so far this year. So we've really seen a variation of performance over different parts of the market and also some different sectors.
Yeah, one of the things about the sectors I think that to take a peek at, a couple things that jump off the page, for us, we look at a rise in the 10-year treasury. The 10-year treasury yield is up 12.3%. That's a pretty big move in 2.5 months. We look at Bitcoin up 54%. That's something that people are talking a little bit more about, has a little bit to do with the launch of ETFs. Something to say here, though. Interest rates going up, normally, that's going to hurt interest rate sensitive sectors. That's why we put some of these sectors below. Utilities, XLU is the ticker we used for that, has not done as well. It's because it's a more interest rate sensitive part of the market. So that kind of explains that. Bitcoin being up tells you that people are risk appetite positive. People are taking on more risk. And that's why we see some of the riskier parts of the market or some of the more speculative parts of the market doing well. So, overall, though, I think, Sean, how do you feel about these numbers that we're looking at on these page? Are these good numbers? Do we feel good about
George,
these numbers?
do you want to go over? George, do you want to go? Do you think it's relevant to go through just the anticipation of Bitcoin kind of topping out based upon what is it, the splitting of the coin or whatever? Do you want to get into detail of that or not really relevant?
Yeah, for this, nah, it's kind of in the ether. No pun intended.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin being up
Let's keep
54%, as
moving.
Jordan said, it's a great. Okay. Yeah, I think
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. Finish your thought.
I was just gonna say it's a great reading for consumer sentiment. As you said, it's showing that people are very risk tolerant when they're willing to put money in speculative investments like cryptocurrency. That's a great sign that they're thinking constructively about the market and they're willing to take kind of a greater level of risk, as you were saying, Jordan. But overall, market's been extremely strong so far this year. Earnings ended up being great. We saw, as we spoke about last time, those large technology companies really leading the way in terms of continuing to innovate, continuing to boost their earnings and their revenue. And that's really carried the market forward so far this year.
Perfect transition to the next slide. We're talking about large companies. Let's go.
Yeah, so one of the things we've seen so far this year, Apple stock has been a huge topic of discussion. It's gone through some ups, it's gone through some downs. It started the year right off the bat with the Barclays analyst downgrading Apple. So it was immediately down about 6% in the first couple trading days of the year. And the excitement has not stopped after that. Since then, they released the Apple Vision Pro, which ended up performing pretty well. They sold all of their units. They stopped the release of their electric vehicle that they were planning to release. Another big thing we saw, EU antitrust lawsuit based on the restrictions that they have on other music apps through the App Store. So apps like Spotify have not had the same advantages that Apple's had on their own App Store.
And that was what, a $2 billion or 1.8 billion euro penalty,
yeah,
right?
I think, yeah, about $2 billion. It was a big one. And the stock price definitely reacted justly for that. It was up at about almost 200 at one point, and now we're back down to a level of about $176. So we've seen a lot of ups and downs. Most recent news, Apple and Google just yesterday in talks to incorporate Apple's AI system, Gemini, into the iPhone. So
Google's AI
some
system.
new fresh excitement behind Apple now, as of yesterday.
Well, I mean, even
just
Jordan and I were just going over, we were going over Copilot and just the advent of AI. I mean, Donnie and I were talking, Jordan, you were actually in that conversation also. We were talking about ChatGPT and how they can, synthesize articles into short paragraphs, even just from a sense of you have a 4-page article and you're like, you know what, I want to read this, but I don't have the time. Copy, paste, synthesize this article for me, and you get it in a brief summary. So there's a lot of opportunity that we know already from AI, but just even from the simple stuff and just adding some extra time and into your lives to not have to focus on creation or extraction of information. It's huge.
Yeah, for sure. And just to kind of touch on Apple, and by the way, Sean very intentionally put ping pong in the title there. So big ups for that. Yeah, Apple has had a very interesting year. It's one of the biggest stocks in the world. Gets a lot of attention for its relevance. It's kind of it's in our everyday life. As Sean was running through that, the dates, the Vision Pro was released February 2nd. They canceled the car on February 27th. The EU judgment came out on March 4th. March 18th, yesterday they announced this Gemini partnership, or the potential for the partnership. By the way, for the EU settlement, just fun fact, it was just under $2 billion. Apple makes $2 billion every 9 days. So if you think about how, impactful that is, it's a little over a week of Apple's, overall work. So some critics say it didn't go deep enough because it needs to be more than 9 days if it's really going to be punitive. And just to talk about the bouncing that Apple's been through, Apple started the year 190, almost right off the back with that downgrade. It was down in the beginning of the year. As we go back to February, it was down about 2.6%. After the EU announcement, it ultimately hit a low of down 11.6% this year. Yet the market has been up all year. And if you remember, the storyline from last year was all about the Magnificent Seven, these 7 stocks, Apple being one of them at the top of the food chain. kind of leading the market higher. So despite Apple's weakness this year, the market has still marched on, which goes to people's talk about the market gaining breadth. In other words, more stocks going up. It still hasn't trickled down into the Russell 2000 like we might have expected, but there are more stocks participating and leading to the rise in the market. Let's talk TikTok.
TikTok, yeah. So there's an I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Impending TikTok ban after a new bill was just passed through the House of Representatives. So TikTok, it's a Chinese-owned social media company that specializes in short-term or short-form content. And it's really blown up over the last 2 or 3 years. And there's kind of some concerns over China owning this company and kind of having the ability to monitor what the users of TikTok are spending their time on. So that's what prompted the ban of TikTok. And they have a choice. They can either divest from the company and a new owner can take over, or it'll end up kind of getting banned from the US. So I would love to hear.
That's given it goes to the Senate. And the Senate doesn't usually
true.
like taking marching orders from the House. So, it still has a ways to go, but yeah, so it is up there. And it's just interesting from a privacy data perspective, right? I mean, we're always talking about China and the concern of them ripping off our intellectual property and either copying or stealing some of our best ideas. And this just goes to how they're infiltrating and, choosing what data is shown to every user.
Yeah. And I think it'll be really interesting to see which company, if any, ends up acquiring TikTok. What are some of the companies you guys think might be in the running for someone that could potentially take over this behemoth that's worth maybe $250 billion?
Well, I think we have to remember, it's not going to be a company where antitrust is going to be an issue, right? Yeah. So the interesting thing about that is what new player that has that capital is going to come in and execute on a deal and be able to put a deal. And that's given that it makes its way through the Senate. So yeah. I think we were talking about what Disney actually having a talk in this. Jordy, you're more up to speed on.
I think there's a ton of really juicy potential buyers here. The nice thing about TikTok,
you watched the whole YouTube about it. I want to hear who you got in the mix.
Oh yeah, no. There's some good ones out there. I don't think we need to say them, but in the interest of time, we'll kind of keep it moving. But I do think that one of the things I hear from people when they hear about this TikTok ban is they're like, "Don't take my TikTok," and the reality is it's not going away. This is just right now, like China doesn't let Instagram and Facebook into China. Like you're not even allowed to use Google in China. They are so paranoid about the US, like kind of inflicting ideas, democratic ideas on the minds of the Chinese population that they restrict a lot of our large companies who don't necessarily have malicious intent as they try to access that market. There's been some evidence that TikTok may not be a totally neutral actor when it goes out and promotes content and runs its AI on the U.S. consumer or the U.S. Participant in their thing. So hopefully the Senate does make the right decision regarding this. I think it does make sense for an American company to be the one overseeing what content is consumed by a lot of the youthful minds in our country. I think that does make sense. I think there is reason.
You and I don't even have it on our phones. Nobody in our organization has it on our phones because we've made a conscious decision to say, hey, listen, there's no need to complicate data for the sense of TikTok when we have Instagram and Facebook. So if everybody wants to look at social media, then go right ahead. But there are some things that you could take individually just to take some precaution.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think, though, when people are worried about this, I agree. The security concern, you and I are kind of on the same page of, this is something that was always seeming.
And I'm sure Michael probably can weigh in a lot on this, just the psychological impacts of social media on our consumers. But we'll save that for his.
Save that for a possible podcast.
Another podcast, absolutely, and a long and complicated one, by the way.
Yeah, but an important thing to remember here is, this is right now being valued in the private market at somewhere around 250 to $300 billion. 250 to 300 billion doesn't just disappear. Nobody wants to, watch that just evaporate if the Senate does end up getting rid of it. Someone will buy it. I wouldn't be shocked to see that it's a company actually that's a little bit smaller than the full valuation of TikTok, that they find a partner who has a stable revenue stream that ultimately is going, will use this to break in and will have private equity and other finance partners, just like Elon Musk had when he bought Twitter. You saw banks and there's a lot of private equity firms that would love to get their hands in this. So it could be a very large company in the US, but maybe not $250 billion large. It could be like 100 or $150 billion company that's looked at as someone who's trying to compete with some of these larger businesses.
So I think one of the things here is we just gotta, we're gonna keep an eye on it. And I think that speculation is speculation, but from a investor standpoint, really nothing more than what is the government doing to help manage the information from leaking out to China or from China's influence on America's consumers. And that's new news, right? So it's been talked about a lot. It's finally gotten its way through a bill in the House of Representatives, and let's see what happens. And let's see if that becomes an opportunity for a domestic, publicly traded company to to profit off of something that should be managed on our shores and not abroad.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Sean, let's take us to inflation.
Yeah. So another thing that just continues to be in the news is inflation here. And it's staying around that 3% level. At the beginning of the year, people were thinking maybe 6 interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. Now 3 is seeming even optimistic just because it's sticking around that 3%. But we thought this chart was super interesting. Brandon, what do you think are some of the things that pop out on this list of goods and services that are inflating or deflating?
Yeah, so obviously everyone sees the headline print of 3.2% inflation, but what does that really mean, and kind of how is that affecting you on a day-to-day basis? Obviously, you can see there's some outliers, auto insurance being 20.6% up, and rental cars being negative 10% of it. But really, some of the important factors to take note of, obviously you can see rent is still relatively high, restaurant meals and housing. But some of the factors to take note of that have been, scaling back. If you look at gas, which is, negative 3.9%, furniture and appliances, school books and supplies, and
but even groceries at 1%.
Yeah, that's what I was about to
How
say.
many people are complaining about the price at grocery stores and the inflation, and it seemed to have tapered. So, I mean, that's good news. It's not good to see restaurant meals if you're a big, going out social person, but I think to pare back some of that going out and experiencing dollar spend, which ultimately it's supply demand pushes the price up, right? To see things like grocery only be at 1% to me is huge. Gas negative, that's impactful to the consumer.
Yeah, I think that's like the most important takeaway from this chart is really just not taking, the inflation number at face value, but, kind of understanding what's, costing you more, what's costing you less, as each of these prints come out and how it's affecting you.
Yeah, I mean, we even talked about alcohol. I mean, your booze might have gone up 2.4%, but I'm sure you can grab a 40 at relatively stable prices and you just get the job done for a little cheaper. Yeah, manage your budget.
I would say one of the things that doesn't pop out on this page at first glance, but if you really look in, overall inflation up 3.2, earnings up 4.3. So one of the things that some people have made some noise about is household earnings are higher than inflation if we look back over the last couple of years. Now, I know that falls on deaf ears for most people because, great, I'm earning more, but inflation's still high. It's not helping them get ahead like they would hope. But that is something, if that persists, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole reason that earnings are up is because of inflation, right? It all is a variable. All these variables impact the others. So it doesn't, you're not going to see inflation up and necessarily see the earnings down, because then you have a huge disparity in supply and demand and the ability to pay for goods and services.
That's a problem. Auto insurance up over 20%, though, is absolutely disgusting. Sean, next slide, please.
Yeah.
Where's homeowner insurance? Because I think that's up too.
All insurance.
So this chart shows how often the stock market is positive over different time periods. So you can see as the time frame gets dragged out, over here to the left, we have 1 month. How often is in 1 month the stock market positive? A little over 60%. We drag that all the way out to 15 to 20 years. 100% of the time, the stock market has been positive when you really drag out that time frame. So I think that this really goes to that behavioral finance that Michael can speak a little bit more to as we get deeper in the presentation. But in short time frames, factors like news, like sentiment, like economic factors can really rattle the stock market and bring it negative in certain years. We saw that in 2022 with the S&P down a little over 20%. But as you really start to put your time frame in mind and look out over these longer periods, you can see that the market just tends to go up. And that kind of goes with what Bobby was saying about inflation is always going up. That's going to lead to higher revenues, higher earnings. Over time, that market is going to drift up. And that's just something to keep in mind as an investor.
This is only looking at 73 years of data, which is merely a blip in the universe's lifespan. So we should keep that in mind.
I just signed a contract that goes back to the beginning of time. And I asked for a line of demarcation. Are we doing like Moses split the Red Sea? Are we going to pick like, 0 AD? Like we got to pick something specific. It can't be just beginning of time.
The year Moses split the Red Sea, the market was on fire that year.
That was a huge year for the market. NVIDIA crushed it.
Literally. All right. We are 21 minutes into the hour. So let's jump into
let's do it.
into our main guest, our main event.
Yes, and I'd like to thank Michael Tozzoli for joining us today. Michael is CEO of West Bergen Mental Healthcare. It's an organization, it's a nonprofit organization that does a full range of community mental health services. I'm a member, I'm a part of the board of trustees at West Bergen. It's a very meaningful organization for me. Michael's got incredible experience. You've been, what is it, year number 15, 16 with West Bergen, Michael?
Actually, a little north of that, but I wasn't always the CEO. So I joined there as a program builder, and so a little, actually just north of 20, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you've been the CEO for 16 years.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Gotta get the facts straight. And yeah, so I mean, West Bergen focuses on a range of services for children, adolescents, adults, and families for issues for trauma, depression, anxiety, really the full range of mental health issues. And I would say you're generally a community service leader in the field of mental health, both for, really any range that the community faces. I think your mentality at the organization is the mental health of the community first, and then fill in where we need to be when we need to be there. Especially, this was something we saw during COVID and how you guys stepped up, warm lines for teachers, and on the frontline staff that were dealing with a lot of PTSD and issues. Then you guys were really there figuring out how can we help that community. Sean, can you go down one slide so we can talk a little bit? So you guys just celebrated your 60 year anniversary, correct?
Yeah,
Michael?
60 years. Yeah, 60 years as a nonprofit in the Ridgewood-based community, but started with a really small group of people, literally around a dining room table. I have these very cool handwritten meeting minute notes that are 60 years old in a notebook that talk about the need for a mental health center. And so that was a long time ago, and we've changed a lot of lives in 60 years.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys, one of the things you do, sliding scales for individuals looking for direct mental health. One of the programs that I'm most excited about is the work you're doing with schools, where we're doing contracts to help schools with clearances and really specializing in those different mental health arenas of anxiety, autism, ADHD, depression, all those things that kids are really suffering from. Whereas it was more like a guidance counselor or a generalist approaching these, where the firm, West Bergen can come in and bring in the specialists required depending on the needs of the school. And then obviously of the residents' homes and some of the other unique things you do, like crisis management and things like that for individuals in the community. Sorry,
Sean, can you go to the next slide?
Yep.
And what I'd like to do is just in the sake of the context of the conversation, we're talking about relationships with money, personal experience with money, evolution of one's views with money, family dynamics around money. But this is the kind of conversation that I think it's better to look at Michael's face and have a full frame dialogue as opposed to looking to slides. So can we close this out and just get back to that conversational view? Do you mind?
Definitely.
Just with something more intimate, I as opposed to looking at slides, I'd rather have this conversation. I just think it flows better for the material.
Yeah.
Agree 100%. And I think just even as we talked about this, and Bobby and I kind of caught up on this, and then Michael and I caught up on what we want to talk about for this discussion. And I'm sitting back as a market guy thinking about behavioral finance and all the psychological aspects of markets like fear and greed, and how kind of chasing after dots and numbers. I talked to Bobby about it, and Bobby was like, really, he was actually staying with his brother-in-law at the time, and he was like, yeah, I'm really interested in talking about the family dynamics. And then I sat down with Michael and talked about it, and he really was talking about, how people's, relationship with money over their life impacted the way they think about it. And I thought it was very interesting that three people who are pretty close and talk all the time about this stuff, we all had a different way of thinking about it. And that really just clued into me and in how intimate the relationship with money is for each individual person. And it's kind of, got its own silo. So I don't know, Michael, if you want to build on that and talk a little bit about what you've seen over your experience with people and money and how that all kind of fits into the psychological picture.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And thank you again for the invitation. Always appreciate the opportunity to think these things through, because Jordan and I actually have known each other quite a while, and we always have conversations about sort of the high emotionality of money, right? And how there's these sort of hot topic, right? When you
We
think
built
about
a whole firm around it, Michael.
Yeah, exactly. You really have. You really have. And yet your field, all right, so I'm sitting here listening to this, well done, by the way, presentation. And so I'm counting words as you're doing that. So I heard the word risk 3 times. Makes me anxious when I hear the word risk, just so you know. So here I am, a listener, I'm hearing the word risk. And so I'm thinking about people that are in your office. I'm thinking about people that are just making their way in life and not even clients of yours, but just trying to figure that out. I heard the word risk tolerance twice. So now I'm hearing the word risk with tolerance. Not exactly words that make me feel less anxious when I'm sort of at the table. And so and yet appropriate and professional for you all to use that kind of language. And really what we've been thinking about is our relationship with money is just that. It is a relationship. And so getting folks to just sort of take a step back and take a breath and really think about that question. What is your relationship with money? What does that look like? What does that feel like today? And what did it look like years ago? The proverbial shut your eyes and picture yourself 10 years old at your kitchen table. What was the culture of money? Was it talked about, not talked about? Was it exciting or scary? Could we pay the bills or not pay the bills? Were we picking out summer homes, or were we maybe going to make the rent this month, right? And probably, in all honesty, most people are somewhere in between, right? Somewhere in the middle of that very large bell curve. And so what we bring to the table is a lot of those issues. And then they come together at different stages in our lives, right? There's the young stage in our life when we're out there building our careers and really figuring that out. And I do a lot of work with couples and clinically, and I'll often see couples early in their experience together, maybe not even married yet. And one of the questions I always ask, and I don't want the answer, I just want them to think about it, is I'll turn to him or her and say, do you know how much the other person makes? Do you know what that number is? Yes or no? What's that about? Do you know what he or she has in the bank? Literally at this moment, do you know what they have in their 401k? Do you know what their student loan profile looks like? Do you know what their behavior around credit card? Because over time, right, we get a sense of each other by spending time. I see someone swiping the card, right, fairly regularly. And if you're going out together and you're dating, you're seeing a lot of that. So
it's amazing, Michael, how much that a lot of those I would say those arguments, those conversations, those decisions around money they don't go back to really where those anxieties stem from, which is how we grew up around money. Because as couples, if we grew up around money, thinking about money in different ways, and we don't acknowledge that, that seems to be the spiral out of control relationship that transpires, because we're not basing it on one another. We're basing it on our own experience in life and struggles in life and relationship with money in life, right? I mean,
completely. And what has been your experience, right? And not just your early life experience. I talk about being 10 years old at the kitchen table, but what was your experience like when you were, early dating? What was your, usually people have a couple quite serious relationships before they jump in and get to that next level of relationship. What did that look like? What did that feel like? How did you talk about it? Was it comfortable? Was it not? And now we sort of blow that up and we bring them into an office, say your office, and we sort of sit in a room and you have, different members of the family looking at each other with different profiles and different emotional relationships to money. And so big difference. Couples can really benefit. We all as human beings can really benefit from thinking about the topic and developing some skills around it. So developing the ability to talk about it is 90% of the battle. Trust is just as much, actually, in terms of sharing information with each other. Because think about your close friends. So bring to mind a really, really, really close friend. Do you know what they have in the bank? Do you know exactly? Now, you all may know because you may be client. They may be clients.
I was gonna say, I actually do. I don't think I can share it though. There's some confidentiality.
No. The answer irrelevant. As usual, Bobby, the answer is irrelevant in my world. It's the process. So the actual answer, the number, totally irrelevant. I'm more interested in the process. And so when you sat with your brother-in-law, you sat with your cousin, you sat with whoever, how much do you know about them and how much do they share and how much are they open? And I think you all can make lists of your friends and family members that you would describe as open. Oh, they're really nice. I love going out with them. She's really an open person. Or no, right? Little closed down, some walled off. And that impacts on connection. It impacts on kind of the relationship, both with each other and with money in general. So complicated topic without question. For couples, top of the list for complexities and for families. Now you're starting to get into intergenerational families. You're cruising along, you have adult children, you're going to leave them money? Cool. What are you going to tell them? When are you going to tell them? How much are you going to tell them? How does that feel to put your cards on the table? Maybe I like my daughter-in-law. Maybe I'm a little anxious about that relationship because it's not just your kid, right? All of a sudden it's the next generation and going across in terms of spouses. Very complicated, very, very complicated.
So, and that almost kind of creates a new baseline or establishes a baseline for how then they look at it for the following generations, because, oh, we're not going to let you get it until you're
right.
65 and retired. And now all of a sudden you're 65 and retired, you're YOLOing it up because you're like, forget it. I haven't had money. And now my parents finally left me this money that I can touch. And, what's the next step for the next generation? And how do they think of money based upon even now your new association with money? So that's also like it's interesting.
Interesting and complicated and impacts on decisions, right? And impacts on how you live. Do you spend a lot? Do you not? And is that because it's how you grew up, or is that because, the money landed in my lap, so to speak, not so easily, but through an inheritance? And what does that mean? Where do you go with that? So you're right. Very, very complicated and interesting, actually. For me, it's really markedly about who they are as people, what their relationship is with uncomfortable topics. I mentioned the word risk, right? Risk tolerance. How comfortable are you being uncomfortable? Right.
How do you get the conversation going or get some progress or progression through the conversation with, because we see it a lot with clients here, older, but not quite so older, kids that are adults, but not fully in stride adults.
Yep.
And, their connection with their own mortality, their own money is to the point where they're almost putting up a wall and a guard to say, I'm not ready to go through this conversation. It's a lot of decision making, and we try to make it simple to say, really, it's not. It's just Do you want it to go to who you want it to go to, or do you want the executor and the courts to figure it out? Like, so just kind of put it into, some sort of a semblance of logic, and you could always revise it later, but there's always that wall that people seem to put up because of their own, sense of mortality and their control or feeling of need of control. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, without question, it's about control. And in all honesty, a little bit of a cultural norm in the United States, right? We're fairly individualistic, right? We're sort of, I made the money, I earned it, so it's sort of my number, right? So even as I'm sitting with my adult kids, a little uncomfortable. One of the things I would think about doing, in all honesty, is blaming you guys completely and totally. So saying, listen, I was on this podcast, I listened to this talk, it made me uncomfortable. Maybe I know you all recorded this. Maybe you want to send that to them, to your adult kids, and say, I'm having a hard time talking about this. I don't even know that I'm ready to talk about this. So sometimes it's the step before the detail. The step before the actual sit down is to talk about how you're feeling about the conversation. So just kind of opening up and saying, I'm struggling with this topic. I'm really having a hard time on this one.
Well, especially for business owners who it's not really just about money. It's about something that they've built. And now they're talking about, well, what if I'm not here? Nobody can handle this. And then it becomes another branch of a conversation, from more walls getting up, a more guarded, more defensive and more scared. It's not, it has nothing to do with anybody other than how they internalize their relationship with what they've created, the money.
And Bobby used the right word, right? They created it, right? So it was nothing, and now it is a complicated big number, or a corporation. And so then you take the emotionality of money, and now we'll probably quadruple that in terms of emotionality, because now it's my baby and it's my emotion, right? And so what people tend to do is under communicate, which we tend to do when we're uncomfortable, right? So as human beings, if I'm uncomfortable talking about something, I'll probably back away and just think, you know what? I'm going to do this the next time I see them. And then the next time comes, and I don't know, you're having a really nice conversation and it's a cool holiday and you're thinking, this isn't the right time. Totally not the right time. Listen, we were celebrating his birthday. God, this isn't the right time. And so down you kick the can over and over and over again. And we tend to do that with any difficult interpersonal relationships that are where we're making it uncomfortable, right? We back away, and sometimes we run. Usually we don't actually run. Sometimes we just back up, right? And so we tend to under communicate. So just starting a process of, I am leaning in, I'm going to try to learn. And I got to tell you, I'm struggling with this. So I'm going to really work on the skills that it takes to communicate about this. And just talking about the process before you show a document or an account number or a number, we just have conversation about it. Essentially, in short, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So we're kind of leaning in. It's like, all right, how can I get a little more comfortable talking about this awkward, uncomfortable, weird, I have ownership over it, I feel possessive. I'm not going to live forever. I really want to, but I'm not going to live forever. So it's really going to go to you. What does that mean? I don't love that you just put that addition on your house because you spent way too much, right? So lots of, whatever those opinions are. So it's all about comfort and really desensitizing ourselves to being uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that communication, we always say the communication is one of those things that if there is no communication or no clear communication, most of the time, the parties that are involved, whether it's husband and wife, brother and sister, partners in business, or mother, father, and children, if there's not communication or clear lines of communication, certain expectations start to then be created in both parties' minds. And more often than not, those expectations aren't in alignment because they haven't communicated. And then as time goes by, those expectations start solidifying into fact. And then when fact doesn't meet, mental fact or expectational fact doesn't match reality, that's when the true friction really transpires. And, a huge part of what we try to do is avoid that. But it's, sometimes people, it is a therapeutic process, and I don't know. I'd love for you to weigh in.
Without question, you guys are a therapeutic process. There's no doubt in my mind that is about, because what you develop the plan. All right, you develop a plan because you're great strategically and you know what you're doing and you really can think of creative and interesting ways to do it. But it's the articulation of the plan and of the desire and of the needs of the family. That's where you become the therapist, right? Because your plan only comes out of a conversation with folks, right? The plan comes out of a desire, a wish. I want to retire when I'm 70. I really want to pass this shore house down to my family, and I don't know how to do that in an effective way. But you have to, know what that's about. So unequivocally, you guys are therapists, and probably as a field would benefit from a little more training in how to have those kind of uncomfortable conversations. I think you guys do a great job. You do an amazing job. But I would bet you guys in particular, because you have this sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, boy, I'm going to take a leap here and describe your culture. You have a slightly informal culture to me, right? It's a slightly relaxed. I'm struggling to see ties here. Like I'm not seeing a lot of ties on the screen. I'm not even shirt and zip. No, I'm not even sure that I'm seeing a suit. That is a message, right? So I'm feeling something when I'm seeing you all. I'm feeling that when I'm seeing your office. I'm feeling that when I'm hearing about, ping pong and things like that. So that's really
that's intentional, because
totally intentional.
To your point, we're trying to relate with people.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I would love, I would love to even, pivot a little bit into the behavioral investment portion of it, because we deal with that. I would say probably just as much as we deal with the conversations around the full planning and the emotional component of money and the dynamics of people and money and emotion. But, dig into a little bit of some of the conversations that you were hoping to have around the behavioral component of investing and how you were hoping Michael could approach that.
Well, one of the things I wanted to kind of piggyback on what you guys were talking about, there's kind of two things that were going through my head, which were not only how people feel about relating with family around money, but I also think about the way individuals. I can even I'll do a little expose on myself. I remember growing up and thinking about conformity, right? Are you normal?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we have people who come in and they ask about planning, these will be maybe successful young people who are they know they're earning a good amount, but they'll say, well, how much should someone my age earning what I'm earning have saved in their 401k? Right? Like almost like, what should I be, as opposed to like, what do I need for my own personal goals? So there's always a little bit of this jockeying versus your surroundings. And, am I within my peer group? Am I here? Am I here? Am I here? How does that change my behavioral pattern? And how does that change my everyday? So I'm kind of interested in just how that societal relationship on top of the family relationship, in your mind, Michael, does that play a role? Like, do you meet people sometimes and you go, oh, this is like a very wealthy person trying not to be wealthy? Or this someone who's not that wealthy and they're trying to, kind of, I've heard people say, the words class up or something like that, and attempt to appear differently. And why is that such a big deal to people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think there's as human beings, we do this comparative nature, right? We sort of compare to the next to us. We did it in class, right? When you did you graduate number 1 in your class, number 12 in your class, 244 in your class, right? We have this desire to put ourselves in line in a linear way compared to the person in front of me and behind me. And so that comparative, and in some ways, not unreasonable. Benchmarking is a great thing for a lot of people in terms of, hey, I'm this age, I'm basically, here are my numbers. How am I doing relative to the goals of wanting to retire by whatever time that is? Now, how reality-based that is a different question. You have some folks that are, in my mind, extremely reality-based, so much so that they're under spending, right? In some ways, particularly when they transition. I've seen this a lot when they transition to retirement. They have a hard time spending money. It scares them, makes them fearful, because they have spent their entire lives saving for retirement. And I have no experience at spending, none. I've been saving for my entire life, and I keep driving the car another year or two, and I don't buy the extra house, and I don't take the world cruise. It's really hard for them to switch, and I think that comparativeness is really common. I think we happen to live in a fairly high-paced area. I think that we need to sort of just talk about that openly. We live in our New York City-based tri-state area. We're a pretty competitive crew. Right, we're just on to the next, and I think that's part of it as well. So there's societal, there's your community, right, in terms of a culture. Then there's your own community in terms of who you hang out with, how are they doing. So I think that's totally normal, and then and common, and then it has impact. It has impact on how you guys make decisions, without question.
Yeah, I mean, we've even seen it on the opposite side where, you know, you go into retirement and every day is a Saturday, and every day is a Saturday means every day is a party. And you have some of these, you know, communities where people are tied into communities, and then the money spend starts to go up because they're at the country club more often, or they went to go buy the new car because now that they're retired, they want to drive with the top down. And, you know, and then we have to almost put the brakes on to say, hey, let's have a real conversation to talk about how this is going to impact your future goals, because right now this early spend, this is the ultimate impact. Those are sometimes, no, not sometimes, those are always harder conversations. It's always easier to say, you're not spending enough, just spend more money. They don't necessarily do it, but the freedom that they have after you tell them time after time starts to, you know, starts to actually come to fruition. But on the flip side, sometimes it's really hard. Once people start spending money, that's a lifestyle that they're not willing to take.
Sure. And then add a complicating factor. I bet that can happen often. And then if it's a couple and the couple are not at the same pace and don't have the same view, i.e. one of them is lunging ahead spending and the other one is pulling back, where do you go with that? How do you pull that together in a way where you can have an open and honest communicative dialogue? Now, you guys, a little bit advantageous on your end is you can show me some models, right? So you can sort of play out some numbers. If I spend at this rate from this age until I'm 99, yeah, I'm not sure this is going to work, man. You know what I mean? and you can show me a chart. You can show me a, you know, whatever it is. Brandon and Sean are going to make charts until all night, and that would show me, you know, where it's going to either end well or not. You know, but how do you do that when you have different members of the family, particularly a couple? And less worried, a little bit worried about the adult children. I'm more worried about the couple being in two different places. So your point is really well made.
So what I'd like to do is, as we continue to talk down this, and I don't want to put a pause on this. I'd rather, you know, I don't want to stop this. I just want to put a pause real quick to say, if anyone has any questions that they think are relevant for this, you know, for this portion of the conversation, we'd really like for you to engage and ask the questions, because that's what we're here for. And we're just going to keep going on our dialogue until we wrap it up. But if there's anything that pops up, we'll be sure to, you know, to make notation of it in the conversation. So sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, that's okay. I really do think that people would benefit from, and listen, there are some folks out there that do this. I've seen this in my own practice. There are some folks that are out there that really help families have these conversations. They can help a couple have these conversations. They can help you have a conversation with your siblings, with your children, whatever that's going to look like. And so there is, and I guess that's what I want to leave folks with, is there really is help out there, whether it would be you guys on your side of the street or my side of the street. There are folks that will sit with you and really teach you how to have those conversations in a healthy and balanced and effective way. And so
what do you think is the best way to transition that conversation, you know, for when we do find ourselves a little bit too, you know, too far into deep waters, feel like, you know, the conversation needs to have a little bit more depth of experience on your side of the table. How would you find a transition to that being impactful or effective, rather?
Yeah, no, I actually think you guys developing, in my opinion, a cadre of therapists that you know that you feel comfortable with in this arena, because it's an unusual specialty. This is a narrow width here. not that wide a street. So I would have a cadre of therapists that you would recommend, believe it or not. And I don't know that that's sort of common in your neck of the woods, but absolutely positively, whether it relates to how to have difficult conversations, whether there is sort of a hot topic that you're working around and people are not able to talk about. Maybe they have an adult child that's not doing well, right? Who isn't working and maybe has issues around drug use or mental health. And that's, how do we go with that? So from your end, sort of saying to them, hey, I feel like you might benefit from spending a little bit of time with a therapist that is trained in this area. And what I would, some folks generationally are going to push back. So one thing that I would suggest is that you think about convincing them to at least try it out. And when I say try it out, I typically suggest that people say, I'm going to encourage you to take a risk, and I'm going to encourage you to take 5 sessions to do, not forever, not ongoing, but go for 5
Like
sessions.
to that end date, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Most times you can sort of say, by the way, parentheses, it's the same thing I do with teens that won't go to therapy either. I say to the parents, convince this kid to come in for 5 sessions, and then it's my job to figure out how to engage this kid, And so similarly with couples and or families, and maybe you're starting with the individual, maybe it's the couple, not sure. But really convincing them to come in and do 4 or 5 sessions just to have a comfortable dialogue. And most guys in this perspective and women from this are usually goal oriented and they're task oriented. So saying to them that the goal of the therapy is to learn the skills, learn the task, learn the language, give them something concrete, right? It's not going to be willy-nilly. It's going to be, here are the skills on how to have these conversations with families.
Hey, Michael, we have a question that popped up. How would you approach having a conversation with your children about the family's financial plan, and when would be a good time?
Great question. So again, I would go back to a little bit of thinking about having watched this and maybe springboarding off that by saying, hey, I watched this webinar about this topic and it got me thinking. And so I want to sit down and make a plan. When is very individual. I think I would be doing that when the folks are mature enough, meaning the kids, right? The adult children, assumedly adult children. So when they're mature enough, when there's a reason to do it. So either by age, although listen, we're all well aware that some folks make it to 107 and some folks don't. So really the conversation probably needs to happen sooner than later. My guess would be that if whoever that individual is thinking about it, they probably should. They're probably picking up on some things that unconsciously in their own mind that should probably push them a little bit to have that conversation. And
well, I also think that it's a great opportunity for families to just discuss how money flows in and out of the house. We went back to how we dealt with money.
Yep.
Or how our parents dealt with money at the kitchen table at 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want your kids to experience money, and how do you want to shape the way that they develop a relationship with money in the future? Because even if they are younger, you may not want to go through the financial plan, but maybe it's a good opportunity to start to go through some of the bills. Absolutely. Or go through some of the costs to do some of the events, excursions, or outings that families do, or sporting events, and just talk about the mechanics around, well, how do mommy and daddy, or daddy and daddy, or mommy and mommy, or whatever your family nucleus looks like. How do we deal with how do we deal with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really remembering that with our kids in particular, our kids watch everything we do. Everything. What you say to your kids, don't quote me, almost irrelevant. It's really about how you relate to them, how you and your spouse talk to each other, how they hear you on the phone with your mom, with grandma, how they see you feel frustrated when you come home from a rough day. What does that look like in your house? So when you've had a really bad day, as someone that rarely happens in your company, but let's say you've had a rough day and you head home, what does that look like? Right? Are you slamming doors? Are you, is it scotch on the rocks, or what's the coping mechanism there? Or are you walking in saying, listen, I've had a really challenging day. help me. Like, let's take a walk. Let's go walk the dog. Can you come with me to the park? Make them part of the process. So know that our kids watch everything we do, both as young ones and also as adults. So, other tip, just to the person who asked the question, they probably know more than you think, because people will glean as they overhear things.
Michael.
Or their assumptions have gotten the best of the better of them.
Absolutely. That's right. That's right. And they may be way wrong.
So, Michael, one of the things that, we find and we try to encourage when we're starting meetings is to always ask questions about what, the other side is thinking, what they're trying to accomplish, what, are the greatest concerns for them. Would you say that tactic in talking to other family members, spouses about finances, as opposed to walking in and assuming their concerns are the same as yours, or you think this is what's important to them, but it turns out they don't really care? Do you think that that's a good tactic to walk in and say, hey, we want to talk about the money. What's important to you? Like what's bugging you? Is that a good?
Yeah, because what you're doing, Jordan, to bring it full circle is really going to the beginning of our conversation. What is your experience of money? What is your understanding of it? How are you doing? Right? How are you doing with your job? How are you doing with savings? Are you 401k-ing? Are you not 401k-ing? What's that about? Yeah, right. Are we maxing? Are we not? And what's your understanding? And this is me, right, talking to my adult child or not so adult child. What's your overall relationship? What do you think? What's your experience of money? So in some ways, it ties exactly to how we began. It's the same conversation. What's your experience and what does it look like and feel? Emphasis on the word feel like.
Yeah. And also I feel like when you're asking that question, it maybe can take some of the anxiety off of it. You're just asking a question.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And,
I think the other thing just to kind of wrap it up here, I think the other thing to think about is not to put pressure on yourself to have the entirety of the conversation, the entirety of the plan, everything handled in one conversation. People feel pressure like, okay, got to be ready for this 2-hour meeting at my dining room table on a Sunday morning where I've invited my kids to come, and we better get this done by 12:30 because there's some game on by 1 and we're going to move on, right? There's meatballs on the table and we're going to be rolling by then. No, really, it's about a process, right? It's about steps towards something. And so knowing that you can break that process down into smaller bites certainly is more realistic. It's much more realistic. It also allows people to plant a seed, deal with something, and step back and give them an opportunity to process and come back. Listen, maybe the overall discussion is going to take a year. Maybe in your head, you invite your adult child out for dinner once a month for the next year to have these little bits of conversation. And remember, all baby steps all together make a life, so these little steps that chain together all of a sudden by the end of the year. And I'm not kidding at all by about a plan that would be a year-long plan about a monthly dinner where you're taking one component of something, having discussion, and then adding it on. That may be much more comfortable. By the way, it may be comfortable for you too, emotionally, not just your kid.
Well, and I know we have a couple of clients that we've worked through where it's not the same dynamic or the same relationship when you have multiple kids with each kid and their ability to handle or deal with some of the mature concepts that we discuss. There's a difference between fair and equal. There's a difference between competent and capable versus questionable. Then you throw special needs into the situation, which is then you want to make sure that somebody's taken care of for the rest of their lives. But is that on now the sibling? And is that really the right dynamic that you want to create in a sibling relationship? So this goes, as deep as the rabbit hole will let us, but I know we're running on an hour now, and I would love to continue this at some point and maybe be a little bit more hyper specific on the topic, because this is all relevant information to everybody. And I think that it's almost like a public service that we can do here, because having this as a conversation in a in an open forum as opposed to a one-to-one might help people to get a little bit more comfortable around what would altogether seem a more awkward conversation.
I could definitely picture a series around a particular topic, right?
We just created something. I love it. Investment committee, the therapy session.
There you go. The
Therapy
mental health
series.
moment. Yep. Love it.
Well, listen, Michael, I appreciate it. Do you have, oh, wait, we have one more question here. Oh, no, it was great. Okay, good. We got praise for the response on the question that was asked. So I'm glad we were able to answer that to people's liking. So is there anything that you think would be important to part with the group today before we leave?
Yeah, two things. Two things as we kind of wrap. One would be really spend some time tonight and the next week reflecting on what your emotional relationship is to money. I don't know that people spend a lot of time actually thinking about that as a concept. So take a deep breath, go take a ride, go take a walk, and really think about and ask yourself honestly and openly, what is my relationship to money? How do I feel when it comes up? What does it look like? How does that work? And so developing your own understanding, developing your own process will help in a gigantic way going forward when we think about step 2, which is, what step can I take? What reasonable next step can I take, either in terms of planning, having communication with family members, maybe increasing my a goal for 24 would be feel like I'm going to communicate more regularly and effectively, maybe with my spouse, my business partner, whatever it is. So understanding step 1 and step 2 is always wanting to push ourselves a little bit. What's the next step that you can do realistically, comfortably, and in a forward motion around this topic?
And I even love the simplicity of just how do you deal when you have a bad day, and how do you incorporate your spouse when you come back to just level you out so you're not slamming the doors or drinking scotch, or I forgot what the third example was, but apparently I just didn't do the third example ever, why it didn't resonate. But that's all phenomenal information. And I think I speak for everybody where I really appreciate you and the time that you spent here today, and it's completely valuable. And I hope that and I know that the other attendees have gained some value.
I really appreciate it. Love you guys, and I love your culture. So I'm happy to come back anytime.
Well, this was beautiful. And guys, we're doing this every month, so just keep an ear out and an eye out for emails and other notifications. We've got the podcast. It released Business Unchained on Spotify, on Google, on iPhone or podcast, or every platform. We've got this on a monthly basis. We have our social media where we're putting out shorts. To Sean's point before, we're doing a whole series on lazy asset management and how diversification can really impact just poor results from generalizations. And we're going to continue to just try to bring more and more content that we hope brings value, and all feedback is appreciated. So thanks to everybody who's watching. Thanks to everybody who's watching the recorded version of this when we send it out. And have a great night, and appreciate you all.